Economic systems have been seen as institutional processes for weighing costs and benefits. Costs, in turn, are foregone alternative benefits. Costs and benefits are ultimately subjective, but that does not mean that they vary arbitrarily, or that one way of weighing them is as rational as the next. The physical and psychic costs of digging a ditch are subjective to whoever digs one. However, the compensating inducement necessary to get A to dig a ditch is objective data to B. If B simply wants a ditch dug and does not care who digs it, then the lowest of the various subjective costs of ditch digging among A, C, D, E, etc. becomes his necessary objective cost. Conversely, how much someone wants a ditch dug is subjective to him, but is objective data to anyone else considering doing such work. Prices convey the experience and subjective feelings of some as effective knowledge to others. It is implicit knowledge in the form of an explicit inducement. Price fluctuations convey knowledge of changing trade-offs among changing options, as people weigh costs and benefits differently over time, with changes in tastes or technology. The totality of knowledge conveyed by the innumerable prices and their widely varying rates of change vastly exceeds what any individual can know or needs to know for his own purposes. How accurately these prices convey knowledge depends on how freely they fluctuate. The use of force to limit those fluctuations, or to change the relationship of one price to another, means that knowledge is distorted to represent not the terms of cooperation possible between A and B, but the force exerted by C. Looked at another way, the array of options people are willing to offer each other are reduced when force is applied to limit the level or the fluctuation of prices, and the array can shrink all the way to the vanishing point when the price is specified by a third party if his specification does not happen to coincide with trade-offs mutually acceptable to entities contemplating transactions. Price fixing as a process cannot be defined by its hoped-for results: a decent wage, reasonable farm prices, affordable housing. Price fixing does not represent simply windfall gains and losses to particular groups, according to whether the price happens to be set higher or lower than it would be otherwise. It represents a net loss to the economy as a whole, to the extent that many transactions do not take place at all, because the mutually acceptable possibilities have been reduced. The set of options simultaneously acceptable to A and B is almost inevitably greater than the set of options simultaneously acceptable to A, B, and C, where C is the third-party observer with force, typically the government. The form in which force is applied to constrain price communication varies widely, including 1. Establishing an upper limit beyond which force will be applied, fines, jail, confiscation, etc., to anyone charging and or paying such prices. 2. Establishing a lower limit. 3. Indirectly raising some prices by taxing particular items more so than others, and indirectly lowering some prices by subsidizing the product with assets forcibly transferred from the taxpayers, rather than having the product paid for only by assets voluntarily transferred by consumers of that product. Direct price controls are not the only method of superseding the market. Other methods include forcibly controlling the characteristics, quality of the product, forcibly restricting competition in the market, forcibly changing the structure of the market through antitrust laws, and comprehensive economic planning backed by force. Again, the use of force is emphasized here not simply because of the incidental unpleasantness of force, but because the essential communication of knowledge is distorted when what can be communicated is circumscribed. All these ways of distorting the free communication of knowledge, preferences, and technological constraints have been growing, but each has its own distinct characteristics. Minimum wage laws and laws forbidding businesses from selling goods below cost are typical of governments forcibly setting a lower limit to price fluctuations. Although minimum wage laws may be more extensive in their coverage, the laws against particular businesses selling below cost are more readily revealing as to the nature and distortions of such processes. It may seem strange, indeed incomprehensible, that a business enterprise set up for the explicit purpose of making a profit would have to be forcibly prevented from selling at a loss, quite aside from the larger social question of whether such a prohibition benefits the economy as a whole. Yet much government regulation of airlines, railroads, various agricultural markets, and of imported goods in general limits how low prices will be allowed to go, whether in the explicit language of forbidding sales below cost, or of preventing ruinous competition, dumping, predatory pricing, or, more positively, of stabilizing the industry, or creating orderly markets, or other euphonious synonyms for price fixing. In addition to these direct prohibitions on lower prices, the administration and judicial interpretation of antitrust laws make sales below cost damning evidence against a business. Moreover, the government's required permission to enter various regulated industries or professions, transportation, broadcasting, medicine, etc., is often denied or restricted to keep competition from forcing prices too low or ruining incumbents, often erroneously described as the industry. The government is not behaving irrationally from a political standpoint. Neither are businesses behaving irrationally from an economic standpoint when they seem to be selling below cost. The costs of an industry are difficult, if not impossible, for third parties to determine. Costs are foregone options, and options are always prospective. The past is irrevocably fixed, so all options are present or future. The objective data available to third parties refer to past actions taken in response to the prospective options subjectively foreseen as of that time. Those subjective forecasts themselves exist neither in the objective data of the past actions nor in the objective record of subsequent events, which may or may not have conformed to the forecasts. Apparently, the foreseen costs were less than the foreseen benefits when Napoleon invaded Russia, or when the Ford Motor Company produced the Edsel. Government regulation can never be based on these fleeting and subjective appraisals of alternatives which actually guide business decision-makers. Even if businessmen could remember everything exactly and describe it precisely, the government would have no way of verifying it. Government regulations and their estimates of cost are based on objective statistical data on actual outlays. Therefore, businesses which determine their prices on the basis of options facing them at a given time often price below objective cost, as defined by past expenditures on production. If the hypothetical Zingo Manufacturing Company is launched with the idea that the world will be eager to buy Zingos, it may spend great sums producing that product, only to discover after the fact that consumers are so disinterested that Zingos can be sold only at prices which cover half of the past costs incurred in producing them. The options at that point are to 1. Sell the existing Zingos at this price, or 2. To incur additional costs by holding Zingos in inventory in hopes of being able to drum up more consumer demand through advertising or other devices, or 3. Declare bankruptcy and let it all become the creditor's problem. Depending upon the capital reserves of the firm, selling below cost may allow them to minimize their losses on this product and survive as a firm producing some other products in the future. But regardless of which future option may be preferred, past cost data are irrelevant. As economists say, sunk costs are sunk. They are history, but they are not economics. The general principle applies much more widely than in economic transactions. Once Napoleon realized he was losing in Russia, it mattered not how many lives had been sacrificed for the goal of conquering the country, or in capturing the Russian territory currently held. If future prospects were not good, he had to pull the army out of Russia and write off the whole operation as a loss. In retreating, Napoleon may well have been returning territory to the Russian armies below cost, in terms of the lives originally sacrificed to capture it. In military terms, as in economic terms, a given physical thing does not represent a given value without regard to time or circumstances. Land, which was prospectively valuable as a strategic area from which to attack the rest of the country, may turn out in retrospect to be just so much impediment on a retreating army's escape route. Businesses sell below cost not only when they have mistakenly forecast the future, but also when their costs for a given decision under specific conditions are less than the usual costs under the usual conditions. The use of otherwise idle equipment may involve far lower incremental costs than acquiring equipment to serve the same specific purpose. Pricing according to these incremental costs, marginal cost pricing in the jargon of the economists, may be rational for the seller and beneficial to the buyer, but is often attacked, penalized, or forbidden by the government. Regulatory agencies have consistently opposed low prices based on low incremental costs and have insisted that the regulated firms base their prices on average costs, including overhead. The extent to which regulatory agencies, the Interstate Commerce Commission, Federal Communications Commission, Civil Aeronautics Board, etc., keep prices above the level preferred by individual firms remains largely unknown to the general public, to whom such agencies are depicted as protecting the public from high prices or exploitation by powerful businesses. The growth of regulatory agencies, the expansion of antitrust laws by legislative enactment and judicial interpretation, and increasing government control of pricing in a variety of ways and areas all put lower limits on price fluctuations, among many other effects that they have. The question is, what effect does this have on the transmission of knowledge? It overstates the actual cost of many goods and services, leading some consumers to do without, even though they are willing and able to pay enough to induce the producers to make more of those goods and services if the producers were free to accept their offers. Knowledge is distorted in the transmission due to the use of force by third parties, in this case, various organs of government. The element of force is crucial to the distortion. The knowledge transmitted by voluntarily chosen prices conveys the terms on which various forms of mutual cooperation are available. The knowledge transmitted under government price constraints reflects the desire to escape punishment, and the knowledge conveyed by such prices does not reflect the full array of options actually available to the economy. In particular, it does not convey the cheapest options. Where force is not involved, then whatever methods of coping with these difficulties emerge, the least cost methods among them will have a decisive competitive advantage in voluntary transactions, whether those methods result from intuitive insight, rationalistic expertise, or simply stumbling across something that happens to work. It does not depend upon the intentional modus operandi of businessmen, but on the systemic effects of competition.